The dog broke ranks first. In a packed emergency room, surrounded by uniformed soldiers and ranking officers, a military canine named Rook yanked his handler sideways, crossed 30 feet of polished floor, and pressed his entire body against the legs of a night shift nurse nobody had ever bothered to learn the name of. She froze. Her coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth, because that dog didn't just find her. He recognized her. And the only people who knew why that mattered were either dead, classified, or standing in that hallway right now, wondering how a woman erased from military records 9 years ago was still alive, still breathing, still wearing hospital scrubs like she was nobody. She was not nobody. She never was. If this story hits you the way it hit me, follow along until the very end. Like this video, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's go. The rain came in sideways that night. It hit the windows of Crestwood General Hospital with enough force to rattle the frames, and the emergency room, already running at 118% capacity on a Tuesday, didn't need the weather to make things worse. It did anyway. A 3-car collision on Route 9 had pushed in 6 patients inside 20 minutes. A man in exam room 4 was seizing. The charge nurse had paged respiratory twice and gotten no answer, and somewhere down the hall, a child was screaming in that specific register that cuts right through everything else and doesn't stop. Claire Merritt moved through all of it like she'd been doing it her whole life, which, in a way, she had. She was 31 years old, 5'6", with dark circles under brown eyes and the kind of posture that comes from years of carrying weight without letting it show. Her scrubs were dark blue. Her badge said C. Merritt, RN. Night shift, and the photo on it looked like someone had caught her mid-thought, which was appropriate because Claire Merritt was always mid-thought. She didn't walk, she navigated. Through gurneys, around supply carts, past clusters of residents who stood in hallways, looking at each other like someone else was going to make the decision. She'd been at Crestwood General for 4 years. Before that, 2 years at a rural clinic in western Montana. Before that, a gap in her employment history that she had never explained to anyone, and that no one had ever pushed hard enough to understand. The night charge nurse, Deb Yates, caught her near the medication station. Deb was 53, short, built like someone who had survived 20 years of emergency nursing and wasn't impressed by much. She handed Claire a chart without looking up from her own. Room 7 needs a reassessment. BP's been dropping since transfer. Nobody's touched it. I'm on it. And room 12 is asking for you specifically. The one from the accident. The teenager. I'll get to her. Deb looked up then. Something in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. You good? Claire had already turned. I'm always good. That was true and not true in the exact proportion that most people live their lives. Room 7 was a 44-year-old man named Gerald, who'd come in with chest pain and been parked there while the trauma bays filled up. He was sitting up in bed with the particular alertness of a person who knows something is wrong and has decided not to say so. Claire checked his pressure, 88/60, down from 102 on intake, pulled his chart, scanned his medications, and was already calling for the attending before she finished reading. His pressure's tanking. He needs imaging, and he needs it now. If we wait on the chest pain presentation and this is dissection, we've got maybe another 40 minutes before the attending, a second-year resident named Park, who was clearly having the worst night of his short career, looked at her with that particular expression she had learned to recognize, the one that said, "You're a nurse, not a doctor, and I'm tired." "I'll evaluate when I can, Ms. Merritt. It's Claire, and I'm telling you what, I heard you." She stood there for 1 beat, 2. Long enough to make the choice, which wasn't really a choice at all. She pulled out her phone, texted the attending hospitalist directly, flagged the chart with a priority notation, and went to document everything she'd observed with timestamps. Because Claire Merritt had learned a long time ago that when nobody listens, you build the record that makes them listen later. Gerald watched her from the bed. "Am I dying?" "Not tonight," she said, and she meant it. "You're going to be fine. I'm going to make sure of it." He nodded slowly. "You've done this before. Not the hospital thing. The keeping calm when everything's going wrong thing." She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes because it never did, but it was real enough. "Get some rest, Gerald." She left before he could ask anything else. The teenager in room 12 was named Maya, 16 years old, passenger in the back seat when the collision happened. 2 broken ribs, a lacerated forearm, and the specific shell-shocked expression of someone who had just understood for the first time that the world could hurt her. Her mother sat beside the bed holding her hand with both of hers, gripping so hard the knuckles were white. Claire sat on the rolling stool instead of standing. That was something she'd figured out years ago. You sit down, you become a person instead of a uniform. "Hey, Maya." The girl's eyes found her. "Are you the one who talked to me in the ambulance?" "No, that was the paramedic. But I've been watching your chart." "My chest hurts when I breathe." "I know. The ribs take time. The breathing's going to hurt for a few weeks, but it gets better, I promise." "How do you know?" Claire paused just a half second. "I've seen a lot of people heal." Maya's mother looked at her. "She keeps asking if she's going to be okay." "She is." Claire leaned forward slightly. "Maya, your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Everything that's hurting right now is your body repairing itself. That's not weakness. That's actually you being incredibly strong without even trying." Something in the girl's face shifted. Not a lot, but enough. Claire stayed another 6 minutes, answered the mother's questions, adjusted the pain management chart, and was halfway down the hall when the front doors opened and the night changed completely. She heard them before she saw them. Not the noise of it. Military personnel move quieter than civilians expect. It was the energy shift, the way the air in the room changed pressure. She'd felt it before, in places that had nothing to do with hospitals, and her body registered it before her mind processed what she was seeing. 4 uniformed Army MPs came through the sliding doors first, hands loose but ready, eyes moving across the room in the systematic sweep of people trained to assess threat and space simultaneously. Behind them, a gurney, civilian medical transport pushing it, not hospital staff, carrying a man in his 50s, oxygen mask on, BP monitor attached, dressed in civilian clothes but with the specific bearing of someone military, even unconscious. And then behind all of it, filling the doorway with a presence that had nothing to do with physical size, Dr. Nolan Graves, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Crestwood General, 48 years old. The kind of man who had decided somewhere in his late 30s that his position and his expertise were the same thing, and had spent the decades since making sure everyone around him understood that. He had a jawline that photographed well, and a voice that carried without him raising it, and he moved through the ER like it was a stage he'd designed himself. He was technically excellent. Claire had seen that. She'd also seen the other thing, the way he talked over nurses, the way he dismissed concerns that came from anyone below him in the hierarchy, the particular cruelty of a man who was smart enough to know better and chose not to be. He was already talking to the MPs when Claire registered the patient on the gurney. Not the man himself. She didn't recognize him. It was the IV configuration, the specific way the monitor leads were placed, the medication bag hanging at the wrong angle for standard transport. Somebody had started treatment in transit under field conditions and hadn't fully handed off. She could see it from 15 feet away. She moved toward the desk to pull the incoming chart. "Nurses clear the immediate area." Graves said it loud enough for the room. Not to her specifically. That somehow made it worse. "We're running a controlled transfer. This is a priority patient." Claire kept moving toward the desk. She wasn't blocking anything. "Ms. Merritt." Deb appeared at her elbow, voice low. "Graves wants everyone back. He's got a medication hang issue on that gurney. Someone needs to flag it." "Then flag it from over there." Claire looked at Deb. Deb looked back at her with the expression of a woman who had watched enough talented nurses get buried by men like Graves to know when to pick a different battle. Claire went to the desk. She pulled the incoming chart digitally. Patients didn't stop being her responsibility because someone had rearranged the room. She scanned the transfer notes. There, the medication discrepancy. Fentanyl drip entered at the point of transport, but no weight-based calculation attached to the documentation. Either it was correct and underdocumented, or it was wrong. Both were problems. She walked back toward the trauma bay. Not fast. Not confrontational. Just the walk of a person doing her job. Graves saw her coming. He turned from the MP he'd been speaking with and looked at her with an expression that was almost bored. "I said nurses clear. There's a documentation gap on the fentanyl drip. If the calculation isn't, the transfer team handled the medication management. Then I need to see their weight-based math before he goes to the trauma bay, because if it's off, and we push anything else without, he's a military patient under a specific protocol." Graves stepped slightly into her space, not dramatically, just enough. And you're a night shift nurse who does not have clearance to access this patient's file. The room had gone a few degrees quieter. It wasn't silence. The ER never went silent, but the staff nearest to them had registered the exchange and were doing that particular thing people do where they pretend not to listen while listening completely. Claire kept her voice even. Clearance has nothing to do with medication safety protocol. What's your name? One of the MPs spoke up, not aggressively, but directly. Claire Merritt, night shift. Ms. Merritt. Graves cut back in, and now the boredom had an edge in it. You're a nurse, not command, not a physician. You don't make the call here. I do. And right now I'm making the call that you step out of this area and let people who know what they're doing handle a situation you don't have the training for. The sentence landed the way he intended it to. She felt it. She'd be lying if she said she didn't. That specific sting of being publicly reduced, spoken down to in front of colleagues, having years of experience dismissed in a single sentence by someone with the right title and the wrong judgment. It was a particular kind of humiliation that was designed to stick. The patient's drip documentation, she started. Enough. Graves pointed toward the hallway. Actually pointed, like she was a dog being redirected. Step out, now, or I will have you removed from this floor tonight. She looked at him. A long moment. Long enough that someone watching might have thought she was deciding something. Then she stepped back, turned, walked toward the nurse's station. Deb was waiting, said nothing, just handed her the next chart. Claire took it. Her hands were steady. She made a note in the system about the medication documentation concern, time-stamped it, entered her badge number, and flagged it for pharmacist review, because that was the part Graves didn't understand about her, or about the kind of person she actually was. She didn't need to win the room. She needed to protect the patient. Those were different things, and only one of them mattered. She'd been doing this for a long time. Gerald in room 7 got his CT scan 40 minutes later after the hospitalist responded to her text. The scan confirmed aortic involvement, not dissection, but close enough to dissection's cousin that the surgical team was called immediately. He was in the OR before midnight. Nobody came to tell her she'd been right. She didn't need them to. The military patient, she still didn't have a name, still didn't have access to that file, had been moved to the secured trauma bay at the far end of the hall, the one they used for high acuity cases that needed isolation from general population. 2 MPs stood outside the door. The civilian transport team had left. Graves had planted himself in the center of that corridor like a flag. Claire went about her next 3 hours. She assessed. She documented. She caught a medication error from a tired resident. She helped Maya's mother find the hospital cafeteria at 2 in the morning and walked her through the discharge paperwork she'd need in 6 hours. She watched the rain slow outside the east wing windows and thought, the way she often did, the way she'd learned to keep in its own compartment, about nothing in particular. That was a lie. She was thinking about the dog. She'd seen it outside when the military vehicles pulled in. She'd only caught it for a second from the hallway window. A Belgian Malinois, tactical vest, on lead with a handler in full gear. Something in her chest had done a thing it hadn't done in a very long time when she saw it, and she'd turned away fast and told herself it didn't mean anything. K9 units were common. The Army used them constantly. There was nothing significant about a dog outside a hospital during a high-security patient transfer. She believed that for approximately 2 more hours. The secondary alarm went off at 3:47 in the morning. Not the cardiac alarm, not the standard overhead code. The security alarm, which at Crestwood General was a specific 3-tone sound that Claire had heard exactly once before in 4 years, during a drill, and never in a real situation. It meant lockdown protocol. It meant someone had assessed a threat inside the building. The ER went from managed chaos to a different kind of chaos in about 15 seconds. She heard it before she understood it, raised voices from the secured corridor. Not screaming, controlled raised voices, which was somehow more alarming. Then the sound of movement, fast, not running but close, from the direction of the south entrance. Then the security desk radio came alive with something she couldn't fully hear, and the 2 security guards at the front station were suddenly moving in opposite directions with their hands on their radios. Deb appeared at her shoulder. What is that? Security triggered. Stay with your patients. Claire. But Claire was already moving toward the secured corridor. Not to engage, not to interfere, but because she knew the layout of this building better than anyone on the night shift. and if something was happening near the isolated trauma bay, the patients in the adjacent rooms were exposed. She got to the junction of the main corridor and the secured wing and stopped. There were 3 of them. Men she didn't recognize, not in uniform, not in scrubs, dressed civilian but moving with the body language of people who had done this before. One of them had his hand on the MP standing outside the trauma bay door, not physically aggressive yet, but positioned in a way that was about to become aggressive very fast. The MP had his hand on his sidearm. A second MP had moved into a flanking position. The men were saying something, demands she couldn't make out. And the whole thing had the specific compressed energy of a situation that was 3 decisions away from becoming something nobody walked back from. She registered all of it in a second and a half, the way you do when you've trained for exactly this kind of compression. Her phone buzzed. Then again. Then the overhead PA crackled, the hospital administrator's voice, tight and controlled. All staff, this is a security event notification. Please proceed to secure patient areas and await further instruction. Do not approach the south wing. Repeat. The sound of a metal cart hitting the floor came from inside the secured bay. Something glass breaking. The MP outside the door made his call. He pulled the patient out of the equation by moving into the doorway, blocking access. The 3 civilians surged forward. What happened in the next 11 seconds was fast and violent and happened behind a door that swung closed before Claire could see more than the start of it. The hospital's external lights caught something through the east wing windows. She looked. Black tactical vehicles. 3 of them, pulling into the ambulance bay with the kind of precise efficiency that was not a local police response. Not state. Not civilian at all. And walking ahead of them, badge visible from 40 feet through rain-smeared glass, a woman in her early 60s with the bearing of someone who had never learned to doubt whether she belonged in a room. Claire pressed back against the wall before she could think about why. The woman was in navy blues, full dress. The insignia on her shoulder said everything. Claire's jaw tightened. She knew that insignia. She knew it the way you know something you learned under conditions you have spent 9 years trying to forget, not because the memory was unclear, but because it was too clear, too specific, carrying too much weight attached to it to look at directly. Her hands, the ones that had been steady all night, were not steady anymore. The tactical team entered through the ambulance bay doors 20 seconds later, 12 of them in full gear, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had a specific objective and weren't interested in anything else in this building except finding it. The woman in navy blues followed them. And then, from the edge of the team, still on lead with his handler but straining forward with everything he had, the dog saw her first. The Malinois hit the end of the lead so hard the handler stumbled, made a sound, not a bark, something else, something lower, something that carried across the noise of the corridor and cut right through it, pulled again. The handler, young, a specialist by the look of him, looked from the dog to where the dog was looking and stopped. Claire was standing against the wall of the east corridor with her badge clipped to her scrubs and her hands at her sides and her expression doing the thing it always did, controlled, flat, unreadable. The dog was looking at her like he had been looking for her for years, because he had been. His name was Rook. She had named him that herself. She had trained with him for 14 months. She had carried him out of a burning building in a country whose name was still classified, with shrapnel in her left shoulder and someone else's blood on her hands, and a decision behind her that nobody at this hospital, nobody in this city, would ever understand. The specialist was speaking into his radio. Claire's back was against the wall, and she could feel her own pulse in her throat, and the thing she had spent 9 years building, the quiet, the invisibility, the careful, invisible life of C. Merritt, night shift RN, nobody important, was coming apart in the fluorescent light of a hospital corridor at 4 in the morning. Rook pulled forward again. The specialist let him go. The dog crossed the distance between them and pressed the full weight of his body against her legs. And his handler was saying something into the radio, and down the corridor the woman in navy blues had turned to look. And Claire looked down at the animal she had not seen in 9 years, and felt something break open inside her that she had kept sealed shut through every quiet shift, every unacknowledged right call, every moment of being spoken to like she was furniture. "No way," she whispered. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Rook looked up at her with amber eyes that recognized exactly who she was. The Admiral was walking toward her now. The tactical team had stopped. The whole corridor had that particular held breath quality of a moment that everyone present understood was significant without knowing why. Claire straightened off the wall. She had not stood like that in 4 years. The posture came back automatically, spine aligned, shoulders back, the specific way you hold your body when you are accustomed to being the person others look to instead of the person others look through. The Admiral stopped 6 feet away. Her face was composed, but something in her eyes was not soft exactly, more like the expression of a person who had been searching for something they'd stopped believing they would find. "Ms. Merritt," she said. Not a question. A recognition. Around them, the hospital was still in partial lockdown. Somewhere in the secured wing, the situation with the civilian intruders was being handled by people trained to handle it. Deb was probably managing her floor with the controlled panic of someone who had not signed up for a military tactical operation during her Tuesday overnight shift. Gerald was in surgery. Maya was sleeping through it all. Claire looked at the Admiral, at the insignia, at the sealed folder the woman was holding in her left hand with the specific grip of someone who had been carrying it carefully for a very long time. "You have the wrong person," Claire said. The Admiral's expression didn't change. "No," she said. "We have exactly the right one." And in the Admiral's right hand, visible now as she shifted the folder, was a badge. Military issue. A rank Claire had not seen in 9 years, attached to a name she had not heard spoken aloud in just as long. Her real name. The one that was supposed to be buried. The badge had her photograph on it, not the one from her hospital ID. Not the tired, mid-thought image of C. Merritt, night shift RN. This photograph was 9 years old and showed a woman with her hair pulled back in regulation style, jaw set, looking directly into the camera with the expression of someone who had not yet learned to make herself invisible. The name below it read, Merritt, Claire A. Staff Sergeant, Combat Medic Specialist, United States Army. Claire looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, then looked back at the Admiral. "You need to lower your voice," she said, though neither of them had been speaking loudly. It was a reflex. Old habit. Control the environment before it controls you. "There's a conference room on the 2nd floor," the Admiral said. There are patients on this floor who need..." "Ms. Merritt," the Admiral's voice dropped, not softer exactly, but more precise, the way a scalpel is more precise than a knife. "My team has the situation in the South Wing contained. Your charge nurse has been briefed that you're needed for a patient consultation. Everything in this building is being managed. What I need is 10 minutes of your time in a room with a door." Claire looked at her for a long moment. Rook was still pressed against her leg. His weight was solid and warm and more real than anything else in the corridor right now. And that was the problem. That realness, that pull towards something she'd closed a door on and plastered over and pretended didn't exist for the better part of a decade. "Fine," she said. 10 minutes. The conference room on the 2nd floor was used for administrative meetings and the occasional family consultation. It had a laminate table, 8 chairs that didn't match, a whiteboard with someone's half-erased shift schedule still on it, and fluorescent lighting that hummed at a frequency designed to make everyone slightly more uncomfortable than they needed to be. Claire sat down. The Admiral remained standing, which Claire noted and decided not to comment on. The specialist with Rook positioned himself outside the door. Through the window, the parking lot lights cut through the rain in long yellow columns. The Admiral set the sealed folder on the table between them. "I'm Admiral Evelyn Ward," she said. "I was assigned to the Office of Special Investigations 14 months ago. Before that, I spent 6 years trying to access a case file that someone very high up had worked very hard to make disappear." "I know who you are," Claire said. That landed. Ward's expression shifted slightly. Not thrown off balance, but recalibrated. "Then you know I didn't come here to cause you problems. Everyone who's ever caused me problems thought they weren't causing me problems. That's kind of the defining feature." Ward almost smiled. Almost. "Fair." She sat down then, across from Claire, and opened the folder. Not dramatically. No spreading of documents across the table. No cinematic reveal. She turned it so Claire could read it and slid it across. Practical. Like a person who had done this enough times to understand that ceremony didn't help. Claire looked down at the first page. It was a casualty report, dated 8 years and 4 months ago. Operation designation redacted. Location designation redacted. 5 names listed under KIA, 2 under DYA. At the bottom of the page, a single line in the addendum field, handwritten and then photocopied until the original handwriting was ghosted but still legible. Incident precipitated by hostile intelligence compromise. Source of compromise under review. Under review. 9 years she'd been living with what that line really meant, and whoever wrote it had used those 2 words to bury it. Keep going, Ward said. She turned the page. The next document was a field report, also partially redacted, but less carefully. Someone had been sloppy with the redaction tool, and full sentences bled through where the black bars had been applied imprecisely. Claire's own name appeared 3 times. Her actions during the incident described in technical language that drained all the blood and noise and weight out of what had actually happened, reducing it to a sequence of tactical notations. Specialist Merritt administered field care under active threat conditions. Specialist Merritt engaged hostile asset. Specialist Merritt was removed from theater. Removed from theater. That was one way to say it. The man in the trauma bay downstairs, Claire said, without looking up. Who is he? Ward's pause was measured. His name is Colonel Denton Ferris, retired. He was your unit's operations coordinator during the deployment in question. Claire set the page down. He was there. He was there. He knew what happened. He knew everything that happened. And 6 weeks ago, he contacted my office from a private email account and told us he had documentation, physical, original documentation, that had never been digitized, never been scanned, never been entered into any system, kept it in a lockbox for 8 years because he said, Ward paused, picked her words carefully, because he said he was waiting until he was sick enough that the consequences didn't scare him anymore. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the room for a moment. What did the 3 men downstairs want? Claire asked. To make sure he never gave us what he has. He already gave it to you? He gave us the location. The documentation is in transit. Separate route, separate team. Ferris was the confirmation piece. He was going to provide a sworn statement tonight. Ward looked at her steadily. They knew we were meeting him here, which means someone in my office has a problem I haven't fully identified yet. Claire absorbed that. Let it settle into the specific shape of information she knew how to carry. So he's still critical. He's stable now. Your charge nurse flagged a medication concern on intake, which our team caught before it compounded. Whoever was managing his drip and transport had been interfered with. The medication discrepancy. The one Graves had dismissed her over, pointed her out of the room over, publicly reduced her over. She didn't say anything about that. Filed it. What do you need from me? She said. On the record? I need you to confirm the events of the operation as a witness. Your testimony, combined with Ferris's statement and the physical documentation, closes the case against Marcus Vane. Ward watched her face when she said the name. Claire didn't give her much to read. You know that name. I know that name. He was your commanding officer. I was the person who had me escorted out of the theater in restraints and filed the report that called me a liability and a criminal, and got my service record sealed so thoroughly that I spent 2 years trying to prove I'd even been in the military. Her voice was steady. That was the 9 years of practice. The specific discipline of not letting the weight of a thing come out in your voice when the weight of it was enormous. Yes, I know Marcus Vane. Ward held her gaze. He's been living very comfortably. I know that too. Not for much longer. Claire sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, she could see the edge of the parking lot where the tactical vehicles were still positioned, their lights off now, just shapes in the rain. She thought about Gerald in surgery, about Maya sleeping with her broken ribs and her new understanding that the world could hurt her, about every patient she'd touched in 4 years in this building, every correct call, nobody acknowledged, every time she'd built the record instead of winning the room. There's something I need to ask you first, she said. Go ahead. The men downstairs, the ones who came for Ferris. She looked at Ward directly. Are there more of them? Is this building still at risk? Ward held eye contact. My team has the 3 in custody. We had a secondary perimeter from the moment we pulled into the lot. If there were others, they've pulled back. I have 2 people going through the security feeds right now. You're not 100% certain. I'm never 100% certain. Neither are you. That was honest. Claire appreciated honest more than she appreciated comfortable. She stood, pushed the chair back, walked to the window. Below her, through the rain, She could see the ambulance bay. The normal machinery of the hospital continuing. A new ambulance pulling in, paramedics unloading, the ordinary emergency of an ordinary night going on around the extraordinary thing happening inside the building. 2 floors below her, Deb was managing the floor. The patients were there. Her patients, technically, for another 3 hours until her shift ended. "I'll give you the testimony," she said, "but I'm finishing my shift first." She heard Ward shift behind her. "Ms. Merritt, there are people on this floor who need consistent care. I'm not leaving them with a short-staffed night shift because my past decided to show up tonight." She turned back. "You said you needed 10 minutes for the initial conversation. You have 2 left. What else do you need me to know right now?" Ward looked at her with an expression Claire couldn't fully categorize, something between respect and the particular frustration of a person who had expected resistance and gotten a different shape of resistance than they'd planned for. "The sworn statement process will take most of tomorrow," Ward said. "We'll need you at the Federal Building on Callaway Street by 8 a.m. I'll be there." "And I need you to understand," Ward hesitated, which was interesting because Ward did not seem like someone who hesitated easily. "What comes out of this case is going to be public, not the classified operational details, those stay sealed, but Vane's prosecution will be public. Your involvement in the events that led to his misconduct charges will be part of the public record. You won't be anonymous anymore." The room held that. Claire thought about the last 9 years, the clinics, the borrowed names and careful paperwork, the hospital badge that said C. Merritt and nothing else. The discipline of taking up exactly as much space as was necessary and no more. The life she'd built in the gap between who she was and who she was allowed to be. "I haven't been anonymous," she said. "I've been erased. Those are different things." She picked up her badge from where she'd set it on the table. The hospital one. The one that said C. Merritt, RN. "I'll see you at 8, she said, and walked out. Rook was waiting in the hallway with his handler. As she passed, the dog turned and fell into step beside her for 4 paces before the handler caught the lead. She didn't look back. The next 2 hours were the strangest of her professional life, which was saying something. She went back to her floor and picked up her charting where she'd left off, because the patient still needed charting and the world had not in fact stopped while her history rearranged itself upstairs. Deb said nothing when she appeared at the nurse's station, just looked at her for a long moment and handed her the next task list. That was Deb. 20 years of emergency nursing had apparently included a policy of not asking questions that weren't going to get useful answers. The south wing remained secured but quieter. The MPs were still at the door. The tactical team had reduced to 4 personnel visible in the building, the others presumably outside or dealing with the 3 men in custody. Colonel Ferris was, according to the monitor readout she could see from the nurse's station, stable. Graves was still there. That surprised her, actually. She'd assumed he'd step back once the military had control of the situation, let them have the secured wing and retreat to the politics of who had jurisdiction over what. But at 5:15 in the morning, she saw him in the corridor outside the south wing, speaking with one of the MPs with the specific energy of a man trying to establish that he was in charge of something he had already lost control of. She watched him for a moment. He hadn't changed. He'd been exactly what he was when he pointed at her and told her to leave. A man using authority as armor, because somewhere underneath the title and the excellent jawline and the ability to make other people feel small, he knew that the night shift nurse he'd dismissed was right about the medication, and he'd chosen his ego over the patient, and she had saved that patient anyway, through the back channels he didn't control. She went back to her charting. At 6:22, the sky outside the east windows started doing the thing it does in early morning, where the darkness shifts quality before it shifts color. A subtle change that only people who work night shifts ever really notice. Claire noticed it. She always had. It was one of the things about night work that she'd held on to even when everything else about her life had felt temporary and provisional and borrowed. The PA crackled. "Code team to South Wing Bay 2. She was moving before the announcement finished, not because it was her assignment. The South Wing was military jurisdiction, and she knew that. She moved because she was a trauma nurse with 9 years of combat medicine underneath her hospital training, and the sound of that code announcement had a specific tone that told her something had changed in Ferris's condition fast. She was at the south wing door in 30 seconds. The MP held up a hand. "Authorized personnel only. I'm the nurse who flagged his medication issue on intake." She said it fast and flat. If his pressure's dropping, it might be related to what was already in his system. I need to be in that room. The MP looked past her. She turned. Ward was in the corridor, 10 feet back, having materialized with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd been monitoring exactly this situation. The Admiral gave a single short nod. The MP stepped aside. The scene inside the bay was controlled chaos, which is not the same as actual chaos, but requires the same navigation. 2 Army medical personnel were working, and a civilian trauma nurse Claire recognized from the East Ward was assisting, looking slightly overwhelmed at the intersection of hospital protocol and military procedure. Ferris was conscious, which was good. Conscious and agitated, which was complicated. His blood pressure was 91/58. Claire crossed to the monitor, looked at the trend line, looked at the medication log, looked at the Army medic, who was perhaps 25 and competent, but clearly running the calculation on what he was and wasn't cleared to administer in a civilian facility. He needs a fluid challenge first before you touch the pressors, she said. His baseline on intake was already compromised. Whatever they gave him in transport depleted his volume. You push pressors on a depleted volume, and you're going to create a different problem. The medic looked at her, at his own chart, back at her. She's right, said the civilian nurse from the East Ward, and Claire could have kissed her for it. Run the bolus, Claire said. 500/15 minutes. Reassess. It wasn't her call to give, technically. She was in a secured military bay outside her assigned floor without the attending physician present. She was a night shift nurse with a hospital badge that said nothing important. But the medic ran the bolus, because sometimes the person who sounds like they know what they're doing is the person who knows what they're doing, and sometimes the hierarchies that are supposed to protect patients are the thing you have to work around to actually protect them. Ferris's pressure started climbing within 8 minutes. At 7 minutes into the bolus, Ferris opened his eyes more fully and looked around the room with the specific awareness of a man who had been in enough medical situations to understand his own numbers. His gaze moved across the Army medic, the civilian nurse, the monitoring equipment, and landed on Claire. Something crossed his face. She couldn't read it completely. Recognition was part of it, something older and more complicated underneath. Merritt, he said. His voice was rough from the oxygen mask they'd removed to help him speak. The room went slightly quieter. Don't try to talk yet, she said. Clinical. Steady. You're here. He said it like a statement, but his eyes were asking a question. I work here. I know. A pause. He was choosing his words carefully, a man with a failing body and a specific limited resource of time and breath. I've known for 3 months. That's why I chose this hospital. She absorbed that without showing what it did to her, filed it for later processing. Your pressure is responding to the fluid. You need to rest. I need to say something first. Colonel Ferris, I need to say it. His eyes were still on her, steady, despite everything. I was there. I know what you did. I know what they said you did, and I know the difference. He stopped, breathed carefully, continued. I'm sorry it took me this long to be dying enough to do the right thing. The Army medic was staring at his chart with the focused attention of a person removing himself from a conversation he understood was not his. Claire looked at Ferris for a long moment. Rest, she said. Give your statement to the Admiral. That's the right thing. I'll keep your pressure stable. She stayed in the room for 11 more minutes until his numbers held, and she'd briefed the Army medic on the monitoring parameters with enough specificity that he wouldn't make another call without the information he needed. Then she went back to her floor. She had 40 minutes left on her shift. She used them. At 7:49 a.m., 12 minutes before her scheduled end time, Deb found her in the supply room cataloging the inventory discrepancy she'd noticed 3 days ago and hadn't had time to formally report. You doing an inventory report, Deb said. Right now. It needs doing. Claire? Deb leaned against the doorframe. Deb never leaned. She was a woman of perpendicular angles and forward momentum. Seeing her lean was like seeing a building tilt slightly on its foundation. Technically possible, inherently alarming. There are 4 military vehicles in our parking lot. The south wing has been locked down for 4 hours. Nolan Graves has been pacing the second-floor administrative hallway like a man waiting for a sentence to be handed down. And you are cataloging gauze. The gauze inventory has been off for a week. What is happening? Claire looked at her. really looked at her. At the 20 years in those eyes, the particular weight of a person who showed up every shift and managed chaos and protected patients and got exactly as much credit for it as people like Graves decided to give her on any given day, which was never enough. Something that should have happened a long time ago, Claire said. And tomorrow the floor is going to need a full senior nurse for the whole shift because I won't be here. Deb studied her. You're not in trouble. No. You're... Deb stopped. Recalibrated. You're going to be okay. I think so. She paused. The inventory is off by about 40 units on the 4x4s, and someone has been signing out wound packing without entering the batch numbers. That needs to go to administration. Deb took the clipboard from her hand. Go home, Claire. My shift isn't... It's 8 minutes. Go. Claire looked at her for one more moment. Thank you, she said, for not asking questions. Deb made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Honey, I ask questions all the time. I just know which ones matter. Claire clocked out at 7:56. She went to her locker, changed out of her scrubs into the jeans and gray pullover she'd come in wearing 11 hours ago, before the rain, before the military vehicles, before Rook pressed against her leg in a fluorescent corridor and dismantled 9 years of careful quiet. She sat on the bench in front of her locker for exactly 90 seconds. Just sat there. Let herself feel the weight of the night and the weight of the morning and the particular disorientation of a person who has been managing other people's crises for so long that their own emergency catches them sideways. She was not crying. She was also not crying. She was doing the thing in between that doesn't have a name, but that anyone who has held themselves together for a very long time in a very difficult situation will recognize instantly. Then she stood, put the straps of her bag over her shoulder, closed the locker. The hospital lobby at 8 in the morning was a completely different creature than it was at 3 a.m. Daylight staff arriving, the overnight team filtering out, the specific passing of the baton energy of a shift change that had been the rhythm of her professional life for 4 years. She moved through it like she always had, head down, purposeful, not slow enough to invite conversation. She was almost at the main doors when she heard Graves behind her. Miss Merritt. She stopped, turned. He was standing in the middle of the lobby in his white coat, which he was still wearing at 8 in the morning for reasons she didn't care to analyze. And he had the expression of a man who had spent the night watching something happen that he didn't understand and was trying to reassert narrative control over a story he was no longer writing. The situation last night, he started, the military presence. I understand there may have been a patient care element that... He stopped, reworded. The medication concern you raised on the priority patient. She waited. It turned out to be another stop. This one longer. The specific pause of a man for whom the next word was going to cost him something. Relevant, she said, because she was tired and she was going to be at a federal building in 50 minutes, and she did not have the bandwidth for him to find his way to the end of that sentence on his own. Yes. He held her gaze. Something in his expression was trying to be an apology and not quite making it all the way there. The documentation gap you flagged was relevant. I know, she said. I may have... He cleared his throat. The way I handled the situation in the corridor, that could have been handled differently. She looked at him, this man who had pointed at her like a dog, who had used the word command as a weapon and her job title as a diminishment in front of colleagues, in the middle of a situation where she was right and he was wrong, and the patient was the one who paid the price of that difference. Yes, she said. It could have. She turned back toward the doors. Ms. Merritt, have a good shift, Dr. Graves. She walked out into the morning. The rain had stopped sometime in the last hour. The parking lot was wet and gray-bright, the sky the color of old aluminum, and the 4 tactical vehicles were still there, but their personnel had reduced to 2, standing by the ambulance bay entrance. She recognized the specialist, Rook's handler, by the door. Rook was with him. On lead but sitting, not pacing. The dog saw her the moment she came through the doors and stood up in that specific way. Not tense, not alert aggressive, just oriented, like a compass needle finding north. She walked to her car, a 7-year-old Subaru with a cracked windshield she'd been meaning to fix for 3 months, and a parking permit sticker that was 2 weeks from expiring. She opened the door, put her bag on the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. She had 43 minutes before she needed to be at the federal building on Callaway Street. She had 9 years of testimony to organize in her head. She had the name Marcus Vane rolling around somewhere in her chest like a stone she'd swallowed a long time ago and learned to live with, and the fact that in a matter of hours that stone was going to be removed by the specific surgery of legal consequence and truth on the record. And she wasn't sure what the space where it had been was going to feel like. She started the car. She was 3 blocks from the hospital when her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She didn't look at it. She drove the next 2 blocks, stopped at a light, looked. A text from an unknown number, 4 words. Don't go to Callaway. Her hand stilled on the wheel. The light turned green. Behind her, in her rear-view mirror, a black sedan that had been parked on the same street as the hospital was now 3 car lengths back and matching her speed. She didn't accelerate, didn't brake, kept her eyes on the road and her breathing even, and her mind running the calculation, the specific rapid geometry of a woman who had done this before, in a different country, with higher stakes, and had survived it. Her phone buzzed again. They know where you're going. Ward's office is compromised. Trust no one from that building until you hear from me directly. The number was still unknown. But the next message that came through, a photograph, grainy, taken in a field setting in low light 9 years ago, showed 2 people she recognized. Herself, in uniform, younger, with a dog beside her whose vest markings she knew as well as her own handwriting. And the person who had sent this photograph was someone who should not have had it, because the only copies of that image had been in a sealed file that had been classified above her clearance level. The sedan behind her closed to 2 car lengths. Claire pressed the phone to her thigh without looking at it again, and took the next left instead of continuing toward Callaway Street, driving without a destination. While the morning settled hard and gray around her, and the thing she'd walked back into was already more complicated than anyone in that conference room had let on. She drove east, not toward Callaway, not toward her apartment, not toward anywhere with a name she'd given anyone recently. East, because east meant the river road, and the river road meant long sight lines and minimal turnoffs, and the ability to see exactly what was behind you without ambiguity. Old habit, the kind that doesn't ask permission before it activates. The sedan stayed with her through 2 turns. After the third, a right onto Mercer that took her away from the river road and back toward the commercial district, it dropped back far enough to be almost convincing, not convincing enough. The driver was good but not exceptional, maintaining following distance like someone who had read a manual rather than someone who had done this in conditions where getting it wrong meant something permanent. She kept her speed exactly at the limit, no variation. She needed them to think she hadn't made them yet. Her phone was still face down on the passenger seat. The photograph, the classified image, the unknown number. She ran through the logic of it in the part of her brain that did this kind of work automatically, the part she'd spent 4 years trying to muffle with routine and charting and the manageable emergencies of a hospital night shift. Someone had access to sealed records. That meant either someone inside Ward's investigation had pulled the file and was now warning her away from it, or someone outside the investigation had access they shouldn't have and was using it as a threat dressed as a warning. The distinction mattered. The photograph itself was evidence of the breach. Whoever sent it had just confirmed they could access classified materials, which was either a credential or a crime depending on which side of this they were standing on. She needed to know which. She pulled into the parking structure on Delaney Street, 3rd level, and sat. The sedan did not follow her in. She watched the entry ramp for 90 seconds. Nothing. She picked up her phone and looked at the unknown number again. Then she did something she had not done in 9 years. She opened the contacts she'd ported from phone to phone through every move, every job change, every relocation. Contacts she'd never deleted because deleting them would have meant deciding she was done, and she'd never let herself decide that. She scrolled to a name that was listed only as RV and called it. It rang 4 times. She expected voicemail. I wondered how long that would take. A man's voice. Mid-50s, she'd have guessed if she didn't know better. Slight Colorado flatness in the vowels. You're in a parking structure. How? You always went to parking structures when you needed to think. Hamid used to say it was your version of a quiet room. Hamid. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 8 years. The name hit her somewhere behind the sternum, and she breathed through it. Who are you? She said. You know who I am. I know who you were. I don't know whose side you're on right now, which is a different question. A pause. Not hesitation. Consideration. I'm on the side I've always been on, which is yours, whether you want it or not. Another pause. The photograph I sent you was in Vane's personal archive, not in the official classified file. He kept copies of things that were useful to him. I've had access to his archive for about 6 weeks. You've been inside his operation, adjacent to it, long enough to know that Ward's office has a problem she doesn't know about yet. Her second in command, a man named Paletti. He's been feeding information upstream for at least 3 months. Not to Vane directly, to someone who works for Vane. The 3 men who came for Ferris last night weren't contractors. They were active service, working off books. She absorbed that. Active service. Not retired criminals. Actual uniformed personnel being used as a private enforcement arm. Where are you, she said. 12 minutes from where you are. You've been tracking me. I've been tracking the sedan that's been tracking you. There's a difference. His voice shifted slightly. Less dry, more direct. Claire, I need you to listen to me carefully. Ferris has the original documentation in a lockbox that the transit team is carrying, but Vane knows about the lockbox. He doesn't know the contents. Ferris kept the specific records compartmentalized, even from his own lawyer. But Vane knows it exists, and he has people trying to intercept the transit team right now. Her hand tightened on the phone. Ward needs to know. Ward can't receive that communication through official channels without it going through Paletti. I need you to be the one who tells her, in person, not at Callaway, not through her office system. Where is she? Still at Crestwood. She hasn't left. Ferris's condition kept her there. Claire was already starting the car. The sedan, she said. 2 options. I can draw them off, give you a clean run back to the hospital, or? You drive like I know you can drive, and you don't give them time to be a problem. She pulled out of the parking spot. Draw them off. That's the more cautious choice. I know. Do it anyway. She heard something that might have been a laugh, very brief, very dry. 3 minutes. When you see a gray pickup turn onto Delaney from the west end, go. She idled at the parking structure exit, with her foot on the brake, and watched the street. The gray pickup appeared at 2 minutes 40 seconds. It moved through the intersection with the deliberate pace of a vehicle making itself visible, and she saw the sedan, which had been parked half a block up, pull out to follow it. She went. The drive back to Crestwood General took 9 minutes. She didn't run lights. Running lights created records, and records could be tracked, and she was not interested in being trackable for the next hour. She drove quickly but clean, the way she'd been taught in a different context for different reasons, and she was in the hospital parking lot before her adrenaline had finished metabolizing. She walked through the ambulance bay entrance. The 2 tactical team members who'd been there at shift change were still there, different personnel now, and one of them clocked her immediately. Restricted access. I need Admiral Ward right now, not through radio, not through the building PA. I need to physically be in front of her in the next 2 minutes. She held up her hospital badge. My name is Claire Merritt. She knows who I am. Tell her the word Paletti and watch her face. The tactical officer looked at her for exactly 2 seconds, then spoke into his radio. Ward appeared in the ambulance bay doorway 40 seconds later. She looked like a person who had not slept, which was accurate, and like a person who was managing that fact through pure structural discipline, which was also accurate. She looked at Claire and then she said, "Inside." They went to the same second-floor conference room. This time, Ward closed the door herself. "Paletti," Claire said, before Ward could speak. Ward's face did something complicated. Not surprise exactly. More like the specific expression of a person who has been carrying a suspicion they hoped was wrong and just got confirmation. Where did you hear that name? Someone who has been inside Vane's peripheral operation for 6 weeks. He says Paletti has been feeding information upstream for 3 months. The men last night were active service. That's... Ward stopped, started again. That's a significant allegation. The transit team carrying Ferris's documentation. Vane knows about the lockbox. He doesn't know the contents, but he knows it's in transit. Claire watched Ward's face process this. How many people knew the transit route? Ward was already moving, pulling out her personal cell phone, not the official line, and dialing. She held it to her ear and spoke 3 sentences to whoever answered, short and specific, then ended the call. The transit team checks in every 40 minutes, Ward said. They were due to check in 14 minutes ago. They're late. They're late. The room held that. Who was the source? Ward asked. The person who told you about Paletti. Someone I trust. That's not an answer. It's the answer you're getting right now. Claire held her gaze. Do you have a way to reach the transit team that doesn't go through your office system? Ward looked at her for a moment with the expression of a senior officer being given parameters by someone who technically had no rank whatsoever. Then she pulled out a second phone, a basic model, not government issued, and dialed a different number. It rang. And rang. On the seventh ring, someone picked up. Hendricks. The voice on the other end was tight. Background noise, road noise, and something else underneath it that Claire recognized without being able to immediately name. Sit rep, Ward said. We have a problem. Hendricks's voice was controlled but compressed. We picked up a tail coming out of the depot. We've rerouted twice. They're still with us. How many? 2 vehicles. Professional. They're not trying to stop us yet. I think they're waiting for a location. Don't give them one. Find a public position with sight lines and hold. Ward looked at Claire while she talked. I'm sending additional personnel. How long? 20 minutes. A pause on the line. We can hold 20 minutes. Ward ended the call. She stood very still for a moment with both phones in her hands and the specific look of a person recalculating everything they thought they knew about the geometry of the situation they were managing. I need to make 2 calls, she said, and I need to figure out who in my office is actually clean. How many people know about Paletti right now? You, me, your source. Keep it that way until the documentation is secure. Claire paused. Can you get the transit team rerouted to a location that only you select, using only that phone, without it going through any system Paletti has access to? Yes. Then do that first, everything else second. Ward looked at her. Really looked at her, the way she had in the corridor last night when Rook had identified her, but differently now. Then, it had been recognition. Now it was something more like recalibration. The revision of an assessment in real time. You're very good at this, Ward said. I used to do it for a living. Ward made the calls. Claire sat and listened and drank the cold coffee that was still on the conference room table from whenever someone had left it there, and thought about the transit team holding on a road somewhere with 2 vehicles behind them, and Ferris in the trauma bay 2 floors below maintaining a blood pressure that needed consistent monitoring, and the unknown caller, who was currently drawing a sedan away from her on the streets of a city that had been her quiet place for 4 years and was now something else entirely. Her phone buzzed. Clean run. Call me when it's done. And then, after a 2-second gap, Hamid would have been glad you're still at it. She looked at those words for a long time. Then she put the phone face down and went back to the situation in front of her. Ward's call to the rerouted transit team took 11 minutes. By the end of it, she had the lockbox redirected to a federal marshal's office on the opposite side of the city, transported under a different vehicle with escort that Ward had arranged through a channel that bypassed her own office entirely. It wasn't elegant. It left gaps she'd have to account for later. But it worked, which was the only standard that mattered. Paletti, Ward said when she finished. She said the name like she was putting it in a box. I recruited him personally, 3 years ago. People change their positions when their circumstances change. Or they never had the position I thought they had. Also possible. Ward set the phones down, looked at the table. It was the first moment Claire had seen her look tired. Not the managed tiredness of before, but the actual weight of it. The specific exhaustion of a person who has been doing a thing correctly and with integrity for years and has just discovered that the machinery around them has been working against them without their knowledge. The men last night, Claire said. You said you had them in custody. Yes. Have you questioned them through your office? Ward looked up. Because if Paletti has access to interrogation summaries, I need to make another call. Ward was already picking up the clean phone again. Claire nodded. Let her. She stood and went to the window. The morning was fully established now, the aluminum sky from earlier giving way to something warmer, pale winter sun, beginning to work through the cloud cover. The parking lot below had resumed normal operations. Hospital visitors arriving, staff coming and going, the ordinary rhythm of a building that ran regardless of what happened inside it. She thought about what the unknown caller had said. Hamid would have been glad. Hamid Rostami had been her team's interpreter and tactical advisor during the deployment. 41 years old, father of three, the best situational reader she'd ever worked with. He'd been the first one she'd tried to warn about the double agent inside the unit. He'd believed her. He'd helped her build the case. He was one of the 5 KIA on that casualty report. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window. The person who'd sent the photograph, whoever they were, adjacent to Vane's operation, in possession of sealed imagery, they had known Hamid, known him well enough to invoke him as a character reference, which meant they were not a peripheral figure. They were someone who had been there, which meant they were someone who had survived, which meant there was a witness she hadn't known about. She turned back to the room. Ward was finishing her call, her expression now carrying the particular gravity of a person who has confirmed a bad thing and moved past the confirmation into the operational response. The 3 men in custody have been transferred to a secondary location outside my office's direct jurisdiction, federal marshals, clean chain. Good. The documentation reaches the marshal's office in approximately 40 minutes. Ward looked at her. Which means in 40 minutes this becomes a federal evidence matter, and the case against Vane becomes something no one can quietly make disappear. And Paletti. Ward's jaw was set. He doesn't know we know yet. Claire considered that. Then he's still feeding information upstream, which means Vane thinks he still has visibility on this operation. Yes. That's useful. Ward tilted her head very slightly. You want to use it? I want you to use it. Send something through the official channel. Something that looks like the next step in the process but isn't. Something that draws out whoever Vane is using as his contact point. Ward stopped. That's not a bad idea. It's an obvious idea. You were probably already thinking it. I was thinking something adjacent to it. A pause. Your testimony is still critical. Ferris's statement plus the documentation builds the structural case. Your testimony provides the operational truth that explains why the cover-up happened. Without it, Vane's lawyers spend the next 18 months arguing contextual ambiguity. I know. Are you still willing to give it? She looked at the Admiral, at the sealed folder still on the table, at the badge with her real name on it that Ward had set beside it and not picked back up. I was always willing, Claire said. That was never the question. Ward nodded slowly. The door opened. The tactical officer from the ambulance bay was standing in the frame, and his expression had the specific quality of a person delivering information they have already determined is bad. Admiral. He held out a tablet. Transit team just made contact. Ward took it, read the screen. Her face went very still in a way that Claire had not seen before. Not the controlled stillness of competence, but the harder stillness of someone absorbing a blow. What is it? Claire said. Ward turned the tablet. The transit team's check-in message was 3 lines. The lockbox had arrived at the federal marshal's office 17 minutes ahead of schedule on the alternate route. It had been logged, receipted, and opened by the receiving marshal under standard protocol. It was empty. The lockbox was empty. And Colonel Denton Ferris, the man whose blood pressure Claire had stabilized twice in the last 4 hours, the man who had looked at her from a hospital bed and said, I'm sorry. It took me this long to be dying enough to do the right thing, had been found unresponsive in his bay 6 minutes ago. His monitor leads had been disconnected at the source, not from the patient end. Someone had been inside that room. Claire was already moving before Ward finished reading. Not running. Running drew attention, created noise, cost her the 20 seconds of clear thinking she needed before she hit the door of that trauma bay. She moved fast and quiet, the way she'd learned to move in spaces where noise was the difference between reaching someone in time and not reaching them at all. The stairwell was faster than the elevator. She took it 3 flights down, pushed through the door into the secured corridor, and was at the trauma bay before the tactical officer behind her had made it to the first landing. The Army medic was already inside. He'd responded to the monitor alarm. The disconnect had triggered the same way a lead failure would, which bought whoever did it maybe 90 seconds of ambiguity before anyone understood what they were looking at. The medic had the leads reattached. He was running the assessment. His hands were competent, and his face was very young and very serious. Ferris was breathing. That was the first thing Claire clocked when she came through the door. Shallow, irregular, but present. His color was wrong. The gray-blue undertone of someone whose oxygen sat had dropped before the leads went back on, but he was breathing. What's his sat? she said. 89. Coming up. The medic didn't look at her. Working. I got here 40 seconds after the alarm. 40 seconds is a long time. I know. She moved to the other side of the bed, checked his pupils. Sluggish but reactive. Checked his wrist. The IV access point was intact, but the line had been clamped at the source, not pulled. Deliberate. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing had walked into this room and clamped the oxygen and the IV and walked back out, probably in under a minute, probably during the shift overlap, when there were exactly enough people moving through corridors to make one more person invisible. Has anyone checked the corridor camera? She asked, without raising her voice. Someone's on it. Ward had come in behind her. Security desk has the feed. The camera that covers this doorway specifically. Ward looked at her tactical officer, who was already on his radio. Ferris's sat climbed. 91, 93. His breathing steadied slightly. His eyes opened. Not all the way, not with any clarity, but enough. He looked at Claire the way patients do when they are confused and frightened, and the most reliable thing in the room is the person standing closest. You're okay, she said. Not because it was completely true, but because the direction was true, and direction mattered more than precision right now. You're still here. Just breathe. His hand moved, reached. She let him take her wrist because sometimes that was a medical decision too. The patient who holds on is the patient who keeps fighting to stay. Ward came to stand beside her, low voice. The lockbox. I know. Someone knew the alternate route. Someone who had access to your clean phone's call log, or someone who was already positioned at the marshal's office. Either Paletti had a second channel we didn't account for, or... She stopped. Or, Ward said. Or the lockbox was never the primary evidence. Ferris kept things compartmentalized even from his own lawyer. You said that. Which means Vane's people might have intercepted an empty box. Ward went very still. Ferris chose this hospital deliberately, Claire said. He's had 3 months to plan this. A man who keeps physical records for 8 years in a lockbox doesn't send everything on the first vehicle. They both looked at Ferris. His eyes were clearer now, still exhausted, still compromised, but tracking. He looked at Claire and then at Ward, and then his hand moved, not toward Claire this time, but toward himself. His left side, below the blanket. The medic was documenting on the far side of the room. Ferris's eyes moved to Claire. Deliberate, specific. She reached under the blanket at his left side without breaking eye contact with him. Her hand found fabric, a small flat rectangle tucked into the waistband of the hospital gown, pressed against his skin. A folded envelope, sealed. Her name written on it in careful handwriting. Not Ward, not Admiral. Her name, her real name, her full name, the name that was supposed to be buried. She didn't open it, she palmed it. Rest, she told Ferris. Then she looked at Ward. Corridor. Ward followed her out. In the corridor, with the tactical officer 2 steps away and the medic still inside with Ferris, Claire turned the envelope over in her hands. The seal was intact. Ferris's handwriting on the front was the precise, slightly cramped script of a man who had written field reports for 30 years. She opened it. Inside was a single folded page and a small metal key, the kind used for safe deposit boxes, old style, stamped with a bank name she recognized. Third Federal Savings. There were 3 branches in the city. The page was a handwritten letter, single-sided, 12 lines, dated 3 weeks ago. She read it once, twice. Then she handed it to Ward without speaking. Ward read it. Her expression moved through several things and settled somewhere that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite fury, but contained elements of both. When she looked up, something in her face had resolved. The specific resolution of a person who has been fighting a fog and has finally found the edge of it. He split the evidence, Ward said. He put the operational records in the lockbox. The ones that confirmed the cover-up existed, but that Vane's lawyers could argue were misinterpreted or incomplete. Claire took the page back. The corroborating evidence, the specific records that tie Vane personally to the orders he gave, including the orders to seal my file and remove me, those are in a safe deposit box at 3rd Federal Savings, branch on Aldine Avenue. She held up the key. Ferris put this on his body before transport. He didn't tell Ward's office. He didn't tell his lawyer. He told... She paused. He told nobody. He addressed the letter to you. Yes. He trusted you. She looked at the key in her palm. A man she'd seen for the first time last night in a trauma bay, unconscious and compromised, had tucked a key against his own skin and written her name on the envelope. Because he'd known she worked here. Because he'd chosen this hospital for this reason. Because after 8 years of carrying the weight of what he knew, the person he'd decided to trust with the mechanism of the truth was the person whose life the lie had destroyed. She didn't know how to feel about that. She noted the not knowing and moved past it. I need a federal marshal, she said, not Ward's office system. A marshal you access directly, through the clean channel, someone you can have at Aldine Avenue in 30 minutes, who has the authority to open that box as evidence. I can do that. And Paletti needs to be contained before any of this moves. Already in motion. Ward said it with a flatness that suggested in motion meant something specific and not particularly comfortable for Paletti. I made a call from the stairwell. He's being held for questioning under a security review. He doesn't know it's about him yet. The framing is a standard debrief on the breach last night. When he figures it out, he'll lawyer up. That's fine. We don't need his cooperation. We need him isolated from the information stream. Ward was already pulling the clean phone out. Give me the key. I'll have a marshal meet us at... I'll take the key to the bank, Claire said. Ward stopped. The letter is addressed to me. The key was given to me. Claire looked at her steadily. If there is any procedural challenge to the chain of custody on this evidence, I want to be the one who opened that box. With a federal marshal present and the whole thing documented, no gaps. You're not law enforcement. I'm the person whose name is on the file. My presence is relevant to the case. You know that. She held Ward's gaze. I'm not trying to take this over. I'm trying to make sure no one can challenge how this evidence was obtained when it gets in front of a judge. Because Vane's lawyers are going to try every procedural angle they have. Ward looked at her for a long moment. Then she made the call. 38 minutes later, Claire was standing in the back office of the 3rd Federal Savings Branch on Aldine Avenue with a federal marshal named Delacruz, a bank manager who had been called in from home on short notice and was handling it with impressive professionalism, and Admiral Ward via the clean phone on speaker. The box was open on the table in front of her. Ferris had been precise. The contents were organized with the specific care of a man who had been living with the intention of producing them for a long time, and had arranged everything so that anyone looking at it would understand exactly what they were seeing. No ambiguity. No interpretation required. There were 4 things in the box. The first was a signed statement from Ferris, notarized 3 weeks ago, describing the events of the overseas operation in specific operational detail. Dates, coordinates, personnel, the sequence of what had actually happened inside the unit versus what the official report claimed had happened. The statement named Marcus Vane 17 times. It named the double agent. It described the decision Vane had made to protect himself by sacrificing the truth and the specific personnel, including Claire, who had been in the way of that protection. The second was a copy of the original orders, not the filed orders, not the redacted version. The actual original, bearing Vane's signature and a secondary authorization from a now-deceased general whose involvement had never appeared in any official record. The third was a recording, small digital device, old model. Marshal Delacruz bagged it without playing it, but the label on it, in Ferris's handwriting, read Vane M. Verbal directive, operation closure, recorded without knowledge. The fourth was a photograph, different from the one the unknown caller had sent. This one was taken indoors, at what looked like a base facility, showing 4 people around a table with documents spread in front of them. Vane was on the left. Ferris was across from him. The other 2 faces Claire didn't recognize, but their uniforms were clear. She looked at all of it for the time it took to establish that it was real and complete. Then she stepped back and let Delacruz document everything. She went to the corner of the office and called the unknown number. It answered on the second ring. "The box?" he said. "Everything Ferris promised. Recording, original orders, notarized statement." She kept her voice low. "The recording is what seals it. I know what's on the recording." A pause. Vane got sloppy in the last weeks of the operation. He thought the unit was completely controlled. He had a habit of speaking clearly when he thought he was among people who couldn't act against him. "Were you in the room?" A longer pause. "I was adjacent to it." "Who are you?" Another pause. This one with a different quality. She waited. My name is Garrett Lyle, he said. I was a logistics officer attached to your unit for the last month of the deployment. I wasn't in the field. I wasn't in your chain of command, which is why my name never appeared in the investigation. A breath. I watched what they did to your record. I kept copies of what I could access because I thought, someday. That someday took too long. I'm sorry for that. She stood with that for a moment. Lyle, she said, you're the secondary witness. Yes. Ward needs your statement. I know. I'm prepared to give it. I wanted to give you the chance to get the documentation secured first, because I didn't trust the official channel, and I needed to know you were still... He stopped. I needed to know you were in this. I'm in this. Good. A pause. Hamid used to say you were the only person on that unit who would have done what you did. He meant it as a compliment. She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. I know he did. She gave Lyle Ward's clean number. He said he'd call within the hour. She ended the call and went back to where Delacruz was finishing the documentation. The drive back to the hospital took 15 minutes. Ward met her in the lobby. Lyle called, Ward said. I have his statement on record. The recording from the box has been transferred to the Federal Evidence Lab. 2 marshals are at Vane's residence. She paused. He's at his property in Dunmore County. He's been there for 4 days. I think he was waiting to see if Ferris's evidence held up, to see if it materialized at all. Ward's expression was composed, but there was something underneath it, something that Claire recognized as the particular anger of a person who respects the law enough that its violation by the people who claim to uphold it is genuinely personal. We have enough. Right now, today, with what came out of that box and Lyle's corroboration and Ferris's statement, we have enough to move. Then move. There are protocols. I know there are protocols. I'm not asking you to skip them. Claire looked at her directly. I'm telling you not to wait any longer than the protocols require. Because the thing about men like Vane is that they spend their whole lives constructing the appearance of being untouchable, and the moment the construct starts cracking, they start using it as a weapon. He still has people. Paletti is contained, but Paletti is not the whole network. Ward looked at her. The 3 men from last night, Claire said. Active service, working off books. Someone above Paletti directed them here. That someone is still operational. I'm aware. Are you moving on them today? Before end of business. Ward said it with a flatness that settled the question. Claire nodded. Let it go. That was Ward's domain, and Ward was competent in it. Claire had enough evidence of that by now to trust the assessment. Her role in this specific piece was done. The key was in evidence. The box was catalogued. The letter with her name on it was documented. The chain was intact. She sat down on the lobby bench, just sat there. The hospital lobby at 10 in the morning was fully operational around her. Visitors, staff, the ordinary noise of a building, doing what buildings do. And she sat in the middle of it and let herself be tired for the first time since Rook had pressed against her legs in the east corridor. Her left shoulder ached. It always ached in cold weather. A remnant of the shrapnel, the thing that had been removed but had left scar tissue that didn't behave properly when the temperature dropped. She pressed her hand against it briefly and then stopped. Ward sat down beside her. Unusual. Ward was not a person who sat in lobbies. When this is public, Ward said, it's going to move fast. The charges against Vane will be filed federally. His name will be in every outlet that covers military affairs within 48 hours. The personnel connected to him, including the active service individuals, that investigation will run in parallel. A pause. Your name will be part of the public record of the case. I can limit what's released about the specific operational details, but your involvement in the events, your service record, the fact that the cover-up targeted you specifically, that's part of the evidentiary narrative. It can't be separated. I understand. You said you were ready for that. I am. She looked at the floor for a moment. I've been ready for it for 9 years. I just didn't have the pieces to make it mean something. It means something now. She didn't answer that. Outside the lobby windows, the sun had pushed fully through the cloud cover, the first real winter sun of the morning, laying long pale rectangles across the lobby floor. Rook was outside with his handler in the ambulance bay, visible through the glass doors. The dog was sitting, oriented toward the building, oriented toward her. Ferris, she said. His condition. Stable. The medic has been with him continuously since the incident. His cardiologist is being brought in from St. Agatha's. He's got an underlying condition that the stress of the last 12 hours has aggravated. He's not out of the woods, but he's not in immediate danger. He needs to give his verbal testimony on record before his attorney is already coordinating with Dela Cruz. If his condition allows it, they'll do a recorded deposition in his room this afternoon. Ward paused. He asked about you, by the way, after you left the room. He asked the medic if you were still in the building. She absorbed that. He wanted me to know the key was there, she said. That's why he reached for his side. He'd been waiting for a moment when he could make sure I understood. He's been carrying this for 8 years. We both have. The lobby quieted for a moment. Not literally. The noise was constant, but something in the conversation found a natural pause and sat in it. Ward said, "What do you want, Claire? After this? When it's done?" The question landed differently than she expected. She'd been operating in pure forward motion mode since 4 in the morning, each decision leading to the next, each piece of information generating the next required action. And the question of after had been so far outside the operational window that she hadn't let herself look at it. "I want my record corrected," she said. "Officially, completely, with the false citations removed and the accurate account in their place." "That's already in motion. It was in motion from the moment I filed the reopening request 14 months ago." Then she thought about it, really thought about it, which was different from the answer she might have given reflexively. "I want to keep doing what I'm doing, what I've been doing, the work." She looked at her hands, the hands that had spent 9 years doing the same essential thing they'd always done. Keeping people alive, building the record, making the correct call whether or not anyone acknowledged it. "I'm good at this. The nursing, the clinical work. I don't want to walk away from it because my history turned out to be more dramatic than I let people believe. There may be other options. I know. We can talk about other options." She looked at Ward. "After." Ward nodded. Then she stood, back to perpendicular, back to the specific bearing of a person who had things to do and was going to do them. "I'll be in contact when the filing is official. It may be as soon as this afternoon." "I'll be here." Ward walked toward the elevator. Claire sat for another minute. Then she stood, reclipped her hospital badge, and went back to work. Not because she was scheduled. Her shift had ended 3 hours ago. She went back because Deb's short-staffed floor needed a senior nurse, and because being useful was the only thing that had kept her functional for 9 years, and she wasn't going to stop now. She found Deb at the nurse's station and took the next chart without explanation, and Deb handed it to her without requiring one. She worked for 2.5 hours. She discharged Maya, who hugged her around the ribs with more force than someone with 2 cracked ribs technically should have used, and whose mother said thank you with the specific weight of a parent who understood that the person in front of them had done something more than their job description. She checked Gerald's post-operative status. He was in recovery, pressure steady, the surgical team pleased with the outcome. She managed a pediatric asthma case with a resident who was good but not yet confident, and who, by the end of the encounter, was both. At 12:47 p.m., her phone rang, Ward's clean number. She stepped into the supply room. "Vane's been taken into federal custody," Ward said, 40 minutes ago. He didn't resist. His attorney was present. A pause. "Paletti is being formally charged with obstruction and unauthorized disclosure of classified information. 2 of the 3 active service personnel from last night have confirmed they were operating under off-books directives traceable to a Major Reeves, Vane's current intermediary. Reeves is in custody. The 3rd individual from last night is cooperating." She leaned against the supply room shelf and breathed. "The charges against you," Ward said. "The false citations in your military record. They're being formally expunged. I have the paperwork in front of me. It will be filed in the federal system by 5 p.m. today." She looked at the shelves across from her. Gauze, bandages, IV tubing in sealed packages. Supplies she'd touched 1,000 times in this room in 4 years. "Okay," she said. "That's it? Okay? What do you want me to say?" A pause. "Something proportional to what just happened." "Ward," she kept her voice steady, "I've been waiting for this for 9 years. I don't have a reaction big enough for it. All I have is, okay, and thank you. And what's next?" A brief silence. Then, "What's next is that we need your formal testimony. Today, if you're willing. The case is moving, and your account of the operational events needs to be on record before Vane's lawyers begin challenging the evidentiary chain. Where? I can have Delacruz set up at a location of your choosing. Doesn't have to be Callaway. Given what happened this morning with the information leak, I'd rather use a secondary location anyway. Crestwood has a conference room, she said. Second floor. I know the building. Done. 2 p.m. She ended the call. She stood in the supply room for a moment, just a moment, long enough to feel the specific shape of this, not relief exactly, not the clean-edged emotion the word implies, but something more complicated and more human. 9 years compressed into the 40 seconds she allowed herself to stand still. The false record, the borders she'd lived within, the careful geography of a life built around an absence that was supposed to be permanent. Then she counted the supply discrepancies she'd been meaning to finish cataloging. Because the gauze was still 38 units short, and somebody on this floor had been pulling supplies without logging them. And that was a real problem that needed a real solution, and the world did not pause its ordinary requirements just because extraordinary things were happening. She finished the count, logged it, went back to the floor. At 1:50 p.m., she was at the nurse's station finishing a chart when the elevator opened and Graves walked out. He was not in his white coat. That was the first thing she noticed. He was in street clothes, dark jacket, no hospital ID visible. And he had the expression of a man who had received information in the last few hours that had rearranged his understanding of the situation he was in. He looked at her across the nurse's station and walked directly toward her, which was different from the Graves she knew. The Graves she knew never came to her. He positioned himself and expected the environment to orient toward him. He stopped across the counter from her. The patient last night, he said. The priority transfer. I was briefed this morning by hospital administration about the full situation. He paused. The medication concern you raised. You were right. She looked at him, waited. If I'd listened to you in the corridor and the drip had been corrected on intake, the subsequent... He stopped, reworded. The outcome might have been different. Ferris is stable, she said. I know. I reviewed his chart. He held her gaze with the specific difficulty of a man doing something his ego found genuinely costly. You've been on this floor for 4 years. I've worked in this building for 11. And I've been doing... He paused again, longer this time. I've been operating as if the hierarchy was the same thing as the competence. It isn't, I know that. I've always known it, actually. I've just been choosing not to act on it. He put his hands on the counter. I'm sorry for how I spoke to you last night. She looked at him for a long moment. He meant it. She could tell, not because he was convincing, but because the specific ungainliness of the apology was real. A man who was good at performing regret would have done it more smoothly. Okay, she said. That's... He blinked. Okay? You were wrong. You've acknowledged it. That's what an apology is supposed to accomplish. She picked up the chart she'd been working on. I have a deposition at 2. Make sure Room 7's chart is updated before the day shift attending reviews it. She walked past him toward the conference room. She was 10 feet down the hallway when her phone buzzed. Not Ward's number. Not Lyle's unknown number. A number she didn't recognize. Local area code. No identifier. She stopped. The text was 4 words and a photograph. He didn't act alone. The photograph showed Graves. Not in the hospital. In a restaurant, at a table, with 2 men she didn't recognize, except that one of them was wearing a signet ring she'd seen before, in the photograph from Ferris's safe deposit box. The man in the upper left corner, around the table with the documents. The time stamp on the photograph was 8 days ago. Her hand tightened around the phone. She turned back. Graves was still at the nurse's station, writing something on a notepad. Ordinary, composed. A man who had just given an apology and appeared to have meant it. She looked at him and thought about the photograph, about the timing, about a man in an administrative position in a hospital that a retired colonel with classified information had deliberately chosen as the location for his handoff to federal investigators, and about the question she hadn't thought to ask until right now, not how the 3 men had gotten inside the building fast enough to be a problem, but how they had known which hospital to go to at all. Ward's office had been compromised through Paletti, but Paletti hadn't known about this hospital specifically until Ward had already arrived. Someone had told them where Ferris was going before Ward ever got involved. Someone who was in a position to know. She didn't go back to Graves immediately. That was the discipline. The thing that separated a correct response from a reactive one. She stood in the hallway with her phone in her hand and the photograph on the screen, and she thought it through in the 30 seconds she could afford to think before 2 p.m. became a deadline she couldn't move. The photograph was 8 days old. The man with the signet ring had been in Ferris's safe deposit box documentation, which meant he was connected to Vane's network at an operational level. Graves sitting across a restaurant table from him 8 days ago was either coincidence or it was the explanation for something that had been bothering her since 3 in the morning. How 3 men in civilian clothes had materialized inside a hospital with sufficient speed and insider knowledge to get to a secured military patient before the building could properly lock down. You don't walk into an unfamiliar hospital and navigate to a specific secured bay in 4 minutes without help. You need the layout, the access points, the shift schedule, the location of the patient within the building. You need someone who already knows. She forwarded the photograph to Ward's clean number with a single line, Graves, confirm before 2. Then she kept walking toward the conference room because the deposition was happening at 2, regardless, and she needed to be composed for it, and composing herself. While the answer came back was something she could do because she had been doing exactly that, managing the full weight of a thing while appearing to manage less, for 9 years. The conference room had been set up while she was on the floor. Delacruz was there with recording equipment, federal issue, and a second marshal she hadn't met named Ewan. Ward was at the table with a legal pad and 2 pens. There was a pitcher of water and 4 glasses and the same fluorescent light humming at its particular frequency. Claire sat down. Her phone was face up on the table. She'd decided on that deliberately. Visible, not hidden. Whatever came back from Ward would come back during this deposition, and she was not going to pretend she didn't need to know. Ready? Ward said. Yes. Delacruz started the recording, stated the date, time, case number, personnel present. Then he looked at Claire and nodded. She talked for 47 minutes. She had rehearsed this in a way, not aloud, not in any structured form, but in the way you rehearse things you carry in your body. She had been through it so many times in her own head that the sequence was exact and the details were precise, and she could speak them without the kind of hesitation that comes from reconstructing memory. She described the deployment, the unit. The pattern she'd noticed, small things initially, the kind of things a combat medic sees because a combat medic sees the body of the unit the way a physician sees a patient, looking for indicators that don't individually mean anything but together form a pattern. She described the moment she understood what the pattern meant. She described telling Hamid. She described what had happened afterward, in the specific operational language that stripped the emotion out of it and left only the sequence, because that was what the record needed. And the emotion was hers, and it was real, and it didn't need to be witnessed by federal marshals to be valid. She described the decision she'd made in the burning building, the one that had ended her military career as she'd known it, the one that had been called a crime and had been, in fact, the only thing that had saved 3 other lives and stopped the specific harm that a man working against his own unit had been positioned to cause. She described Marcus Vane's face when he told her what the report would say. She described the word criminal being applied to her in official documentation. She described 9 years. Ward did not interrupt. Delacruz did not interrupt. Ewan was very still across the table, outside the conference room window. The hospital operated with its ordinary indifference to the things happening inside this room, and Claire talked until the talking was done, and then she stopped and drank half a glass of water and set it down. Her phone lit up. Ward's clean number. A text, not a call. Graves. Confirmed. Security footage puts him in contact with Reeves' associate twice in the last 10 days. Hospital admin records show he flagged the Ferris transfer to the CMO without authorization. That flag was accessed externally. Federal marshals are outside the building. Your call on timing. She turned the phone so Ward could see it. Ward read it. Her jaw tightened. She looked at Claire. Now, Claire said. Ward made the call. What happened next took 11 minutes and was not dramatic in the way that 11 minutes of consequence usually appear in retrospect. Graves was at the nurses' station on the 3rd floor when 2 federal marshals and a hospital security officer found him. Claire wasn't there for it. She was still in the conference room finishing the formal deposition record, signing the documentation, ensuring the chain of custody on everything she'd stated was properly established before she moved. She heard about it from Deb, who called her personal cell at 2:53 with the specific tone of a person who has witnessed something they are still processing. They just walked Nolan Graves out of this building in handcuffs, Deb said, through the main lobby, in front of everyone. I know. A pause. You know. Yes. Another pause. Longer. Claire, what is happening? She thought about how to answer that. About what Deb had earned across 4 years of handing her charts without asking questions, of covering for her when her night shifts ran long, of looking at her that one morning and asking you good without needing the full answer to mean it. Something that was wrong for a long time got corrected today, she said. That's the accurate version. Is it done? She looked at the conference room table, the recording equipment, the signed documentation, the key that was now in a federal evidence bag, the photograph on her phone that had been forwarded and receipted and added to a case file that was, by now, a documented record that was not going to disappear. Yes, she said, it's done. She signed the last page of the deposition record at 3:15. Delacruz gave her a copy. She folded it and put it in her bag, which was maybe unnecessary. She had access to the digital record through the case number, but she wanted the physical copy in her hands. She had spent too long living in the gap between what actually happened and what was written down to fully trust that the written version would survive without her watching it. Ward walked her to the elevator. Graves's cooperation will be assessed, Ward said. He's claiming his contact with Reeves' associate was a personal acquaintance relationship, that he didn't know the man's connection to Vane. That argument has about a 40% chance of surviving scrutiny. And if it doesn't survive? Then he faces charges in addition to the professional consequences he's already looking at. The hospital board has been notified. His privileges are suspended pending the investigation. Ward paused. Either way, he's done here. Claire pressed the elevator button. He was good at his job, the clinical work. He was actually good at it. I know it doesn't. I'm not making an argument. I'm just saying it. She looked at the elevator doors. People can be genuinely capable and still cause real damage with how they use that capability. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. That's what makes it complicated. Ward looked at her for a moment. You're being more generous than the situation requires. I'm being accurate. Generosity is different. The elevator arrived. What happens with Vane's formal arraignment? Tomorrow morning, federal court. The charges include obstruction of justice, abuse of authority, conspiracy to suppress evidence, and 3 counts related to the off-books deployment of active service personnel. Ward's voice was flat and specific. His attorney has already filed for bail. It will be denied. And the others? The men named in the original operation report. The ones who signed off on my file. 2 are deceased. 3 are retired and have been notified that they are persons of interest in an active federal investigation. Their legal exposure depends on their level of direct participation in the cover-up versus awareness of it. Ward paused. The decorations and commendations attached to the falsified record of the operation are being reviewed for revocation. That process takes time, but it will happen. The elevator doors opened. Claire stepped in. Admiral, she said before the doors closed. Ward looked at her. Thank you for spending 14 months on a case that most people in your position would have left alone. Ward was quiet for a second. It wasn't altruism. The integrity of the system I work inside depends on that system being actually correctable. If I leave alone the cases that are hard to correct, then I'm complicit in what the system becomes. She paused. But you're welcome. The doors closed. Claire rode down to the lobby alone. Rook was still outside. She could see him through the glass before the doors even opened, sitting beside his handler at the ambulance bay edge, oriented toward the building, patient in the way that well-trained animals are patient, which is a different quality of patience than most humans manage. It's not waiting, it's presence. The dog was simply present, and the presence happened to be directed at where she was going to emerge. She pushed through the doors. The cold air hit her, clean, sharp, the first real winter cold of the day after hours of recycled hospital air. And she stood on the ambulance bay concrete and breathed it, and felt the specific quality of being outside a building after something significant has concluded inside it. The particular weight of a transition that has no single moment, but accumulates across all the small moments of a day, until suddenly you're standing in cold air and the thing you were carrying is different now. Still there, but different. The handler, Specialist Torres, She'd learned his name during the second visit to the building. Let the lead go slack. Rook walked to her. Not fast. He wasn't the kind of dog who bounded. He walked with the steady directness of an animal who had located the thing he was interested in and didn't require drama about it. He pressed against her legs, his weight solid and warm and familiar in a way that made her chest do the thing she'd been disciplining it against all day. She put her hand on his head. Just that. Nothing more elaborate. Her hand on his head and his weight against her legs and the cold air and the pale winter sun doing what winter sun does, present, diffuse, without the authority of warmth, but making the light. Torres was a few feet back, giving her the space. She looked down at Rook. He looked up at her with amber eyes that contained no complexity, no history, no grievance, no assessment of her record, or her worth, or her position in any hierarchy. He had found her and he was beside her, and that was the complete extent of what he required. "Hey, buddy," she said quietly. He pressed harder against her leg. She stood there for a while, longer than was strictly necessary, long enough that Torres would have noticed, and didn't say anything, which she appreciated. Then she straightened, breathed, let the cold fill her lungs. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Different unknown number, not Lyle's. She answered. Sergeant Merritt. A man's voice, older, formal. "This is General Allison Pruitt's office. I'm calling on behalf of the General to inform you that your military record correction has been processed and filed as of 3:42 p.m. today. Your rank, service history, and commendations are restored in full, effective retroactively to the date of your separation. You will receive formal documentation by secure courier within 72 hours. She said nothing for a moment. "Miss Merritt?" "Yes," she said. "I'm here. Thank you." The General would like to extend a formal apology on behalf of the United States Army for the failure of its internal processes to protect a member of its service from a miscarriage of, "Tell the General I received the message." She said it without edge, just the complete sentence, exactly what she meant. "Thank you." She ended the call. Torres was politely examining the sky. She put the phone in her pocket, looked at Rook, thought about the word retroactively, applied to 9 years, to every shift she'd worked under a borrowed version of her own name, to every correct call made by a person the official record had called something else. The law was saying the 9 years hadn't happened the way they'd been recorded. But they had happened. Every night shift, every patient, every moment of being spoken to like she was furniture, every moment of building the record when no one was listening, every year of carrying a stone in her chest that was now being described in federal documentation as a wrongful conviction. All of it had happened. No retroactive correction changed the fact that it had been real. She had a complicated relationship with that. She expected she always would. But she was also standing in cold air with her hand on a dog she'd trained and a record that was now true and a name that was hers again, and complicated wasn't the same as unbearable. She had a long history of knowing the difference. She went back inside. Ward found her near the elevator at 4:20, holding 2 cups of coffee from the hospital's ground floor cafe, one of which she held out to Claire with the specific pragmatism of a person who understood that the end of a significant event doesn't mean anyone stops needing caffeine. Claire took it. "I have something to discuss with you," Ward said. "Formally. It can wait until tomorrow if—" "Say it now." Ward looked at her. "The Army's Combat Medic Training Program, the advanced certification track that feeds into Special Operations Medical Support, is losing its program director at the end of next quarter. Retirement. The position requires someone with combat medicine experience, clinical currency, and the specific operational background to teach decision-making under field conditions, not just protocol, the kind of judgment you can't get from a textbook." She paused. "I submitted your name 3 weeks ago, before last night, based on what I already knew about your record." Claire looked at her coffee cup. "The program is based out of Fort Caldwell. 4-day weeks. You'd be able to maintain your clinical hours if you wanted to. The post has an attached medical facility. The position is civilian contractor, not military, which means it's your choice in a way that your service wasn't always your choice." Ward waited. "You'd be training the next generation of people who do what you did in that building 8 years ago. The ones who'll be in the field when everything goes wrong and someone has to make the call." The lobby noise moved around them. 2 floors up, Deb was managing the 4 p.m. shift transition. Gerald was somewhere in recovery, probably asking when he could eat. Maya was home with her mother and two broken ribs, and a new understanding that the world could hurt her, and also that there were people who would stay in the room. The K9 unit, Claire said. Ward almost smiled. Rook has been assigned to the program on a permanent basis. He needs a primary handler with field experience. She paused. Torres is a good specialist, but Rook has made a fairly unambiguous preference statement. Claire looked at the glass doors. Rook was visible outside, still sitting, still patient, still oriented. She thought about what she'd told Ward earlier, that she wanted to keep doing the work. The nursing, the clinical reality of it, the daily unglamorous effort of keeping people alive through competence and attention, and the willingness to build the record when nobody was listening. She had meant that, and she still meant it. But she also thought about the young medic in Ferris's bay, competent and uncertain, running the calculation on what he was allowed to do. She thought about what it would have meant for him to have been trained by someone who could tell him, not from a textbook but from the specific weight of experience, that sometimes the correct call and the sanctioned call are different, and you have to know which one is which, and the way you learn to know is from someone who has lived inside that difference. Yes, she said. Ward nodded once. I'll have the formal offer documentation sent with the record correction. I'll need to give Crestwood adequate notice. Of course. And I'm finishing this week's shifts. I expected nothing less. Ward's tone was dry but not unkind. She drank her coffee. Then she said more quietly, for what it's worth. And I understand it may not be worth much coming from someone on the institutional side of this. I think you handled today with more integrity than most people would have managed. Claire considered that for a moment. I just did what needed doing. That's usually how integrity works. She didn't have an answer to that, so she didn't give one. They stood in the lobby drinking bad hospital coffee while the afternoon moved around them, and that was enough. Marcus Vane was arraigned the following morning at 8:45 a.m. in federal court. The proceedings were covered by 3 national outlets and every military affairs publication with a correspondent in the region. The charges were read in full: obstruction, abuse of authority, conspiracy, the 3 counts related to off-book service personnel. And the bail application was denied on the grounds that the defendant represented a flight risk with the means to act on it. He was remanded to federal custody pending trial. His attorney gave a statement on the courthouse steps that contained the words, false accusations, and politically motivated and look forward to full exoneration, which is what attorneys say when they have a case they cannot win and need to buy time for the client to make peace with the shape of what's coming. Claire was not at the courthouse. She was at Crestwood General, running the morning medication reconciliation on the post-op ward because there was a staffing gap, and she knew how to do it, and it needed doing. She heard about the arraignment from a resident who came in at 9 with his phone in his hand and the expression of someone who had just read something significant. Did you see this? He said, holding the phone toward her. She glanced at the screen. Vane's name in the headline, his photograph beside it, the formal military portrait, the decorated chest, the expression of a man who had spent decades being told that his authority and his integrity were the same thing. Yes, she said. I saw it. Apparently it's connected to something that happened here a few nights ago, the military patient. The post-op reconciliation needs to be done before attending rounds at 10. He blinked. Right, yeah. She handed him the clipboard. She was practical like that. She had always been practical like that. It was not the most emotionally legible quality in a person, and she knew it. Knew that the people around her sometimes wanted the visible reaction, the moment that confirmed they were all interpreting the weight of the same event together. She couldn't always give them that. The significant things happened inside her and were real in there. And what showed on the outside was the next task, the next correct action, the next patient who needed someone to stay in the room. It wasn't coldness. It was the specific shape of a person who had learned that falling apart cost other people something, and had decided a long time ago to keep the falling apart private and the functionality public. She knew it wasn't always healthy. She was working on the distinction. Graves's suspension became a termination 4 days later, when the hospital board completed its preliminary review and determined that his conduct, both the operational negligence regarding Ferris's medication and the confirmed contact with persons involved in a federal criminal enterprise, constituted a fundamental breach of his professional obligation. The termination was announced in an internal memo that was, in the way of internal memos about significant things, thoroughly read by everyone in the building within 4 hours. Deb found her in the break room. Graves is gone, Deb said. I know. Are you? Deb stopped, started differently. How are you doing? Claire looked at her coffee. The real question underneath the surface question was something like, I know something happened that I don't fully understand, and you're in the middle of it, and I don't know if you're okay. Deb was decent enough to ask without requiring a full accounting. I'm okay, Claire said, and then because Deb deserved more than a deflection, I'm actually okay, not just saying it. Deb sat down across from her. The military people who were here? The Admiral? Yes. And the thing with Graves? Yes. And you're leaving? Claire looked up. You've been putting in extra shifts, Deb said. You only do that when you're transitioning out and you don't want to leave a gap. Her expression was not accusatory, just accurate. Where are you going? Fort Caldwell, training program. She paused. Combat medic instruction. Deb was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then, that's what you should be doing. I know. I mean it. You've been... Deb stopped. Claire waited. Deb was choosing her words with care, which was unusual for her. You've been good here. You've been better than good here. But you've also been... She paused again. Too much for this place. In the way that some people are too much for wherever they are. Not because they're difficult, but because the container is too small. She looked at her hands. I don't know what happened 9 years ago. I suspect I'm not cleared to know. But whatever it was, you were waiting to get back to your real size. And now you are. Claire sat with that for a longer moment than she'd expected to need. I'm going to miss this floor, she said. And meant it. You're going to come back for in-service training sessions and I'm going to put you to work, Deb said. Don't think retirement means anything. Her last shift at Crestwood General was a Thursday night, because all her shifts were Thursday nights, and she ran it the way she'd run every other one, completely, without shortcuts, with the particular attention of a person who understood that being present for the last time was not different from being present for the first time, because the patient in front of you never cares which one it is. She discharged 3 patients, caught a lab value that the night resident had missed, helped an elderly man with no family in the city understand what his discharge paperwork meant in plain language instead of medical language, because the medical language was accurate and the plain language was true, and he needed the truth more than the accuracy. She drank 3 cups of bad coffee. She watched the sky do its 4 a.m. shift from black to the quality of darkness that isn't quite black anymore. At 6:50 a.m., she clocked out for the last time. Her locker was already cleared. She'd done that the night before, quietly, between tasks, the way she did things that were significant. The badge was on the shelf. She picked it up, looked at it. See Merritt, RN. The photo where she was mid-thought. She kept it. She wasn't sure why and didn't interrogate the reason too hard. Some things you keep because they're part of the record of who you were in a specific place during a specific time, and the record matters even when the time is over. Deb was at the nurse's station. Didn't say goodbye. They'd already done that, in the break room, in the specific, understated way of 2 people who are not performative about the things that matter to them. She just looked up when Claire passed and gave her a short nod that contained everything it needed to contain. Claire nodded back, walked out. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of clarity that happens after a front has passed and the air has been scoured and everything has a specific sharp edge to it. The parking lot was wet from overnight rain. The sky was pale and high and moving, clouds at altitude, fast, the kind of morning sky that looks like it's going somewhere. She stood beside her car. Her phone rang. Ward. The evidentiary record was presented in a pretrial hearing this morning, Ward said. Vane's legal team attempted to challenge the chain of custody on the safe deposit box contents. The challenge was denied. The recording from the box was admitted in full. The recording alone is the case. The recording alone is the case, Ward confirmed. His attorneys are in discussions about a potential plea. We'll know within the week. She leaned against the car. And the others? The retired officers? 2 have retained counsel. The 3rd issued a statement through his attorney acknowledging awareness of irregularities in the reporting process and expressing willingness to cooperate. Ward paused. That cooperation will be considered in whatever follows. What about the commendations, the ones attached to the falsified report? Revocation proceedings are underway. They'll be stripped from the record. The commendation that should have been yours. Ward paused. That's something I want to discuss when you report to Fort Caldwell, formally, with the appropriate personnel present. She understood what that meant. She let it sit rather than addressing it directly, because the distance between understanding something and being ready to receive it is real, and she was allowed to take it at her own pace. 1 week, she said. I'll be at Fort Caldwell in 1 week. Rook will be waiting. She ended the call, looked at the sky. There is a particular quality to the end of something long. Not the clean severance of a single event, not the relief of a door closing on something finished, but the stranger experience of realizing that the weight you've been carrying has not disappeared. It has changed form. You still carry it. You always will. The 9 years don't unhappen because a record is corrected. Hamid doesn't come back because a man in custody has stopped being able to protect himself from the truth. The burning building and the decision inside it and the cost of that decision, those are hers. They live in her shoulder when the temperature drops. They live in the way she builds the record before she needs it. They live in the specific posture she had stopped using and has now quietly resumed. What changes is not the weight. What changes is what the weight is made of. It used to be made of injustice, of a lie with institutional authority behind it, of being called a criminal by the people who should have called her right. That gave the weight a specific quality of wrongness, of being foreign to her, of being something imposed. Now the weight is just hers. History. The specific density of a life that has moved through difficult things and come out the other side without being simple about it. She could carry that. She had always been carrying it. The difference was that now she didn't have to carry it alone in a building where nobody knew her real name. She got in the car. The drive out of the city toward Fort Caldwell took most of a morning, past the commercial districts and the residential streets, and the river road with its long sight lines, past the edge of the city where the density thinned and the land opened up, and the sky got bigger. She drove with the window cracked because she wanted the cold air and the noise of it, the physical sensation of moving through space at speed, which is a thing that helps when the inside of your head is very full. She thought about Deb's word, container. She thought about every correct call made inside a container that was too small for it. Every medication flag, every lab value caught, every patient she'd sat down for because sitting down made her a person instead of a uniform. All of it done inside a space that couldn't fully hold who she was, and all of it real and good and worth doing anyway, because that's the thing about doing the right work in the wrong container. The work is still right. The work doesn't become less than what it is because the structure around it fails to recognize it. Gerald's aorta didn't care that the attending had dismissed her concern. Maya's ribs healed at the pace ribs heal, regardless of what Graves thought of her standing in a corridor. She had mattered in that building, in every building before it, even when it wasn't acknowledged, even when the record said something else. Especially then. That was the thing she wanted to teach. The thing no textbook gets right and no protocol captures. That you do the correct thing not because someone is watching and not because the hierarchy will reward you, but because the person in front of you is real and their life is real, and your competence is the only thing standing between them and a worse outcome. You build the record not because you know it will vindicate you, but because the record is what truth looks like when someone finally decides to look. You stay in the room when the room is difficult, not because you are fearless, but because leaving costs something you're not willing to spend. She had been trying to be small for 9 years. Not invisible, small. Taking up exactly as much space as was necessary and no more. Moving through institutions without leaving marks. Keeping her name out of conversations she knew she could have led. She had thought of this as survival. She understood now that it was also practice. Without intending it, she had been practicing the specific discipline of a person who knows that their value doesn't require external confirmation to be real. She had done the right thing in the burning building. She had done the right thing in the hospital corridor at 3 a.m. The record had been wrong about her for 9 years, and she had been right about herself the entire time, and there is something in that. Not comfort exactly, but something foundational, something that doesn't break. Fort Caldwell's outer gate appeared on the horizon. She pulled up to the checkpoint and stated her name, her real name, the full one, and watched the guard verify it against his list and wave her through. Rook was on the training ground inside the wire with Torres. She could see them from the approach road, the dog working a scent trail, head down and purposeful, and the specialist watching with his arms folded and the expression of a good handler who knows when to let an animal work. She parked. Got out. Rook's head came up before she closed the car door. Torres looked over and, recognizing the situation, unclipped the lead. The dog crossed the distance at a run, the only time she'd seen him actually run. No careful, steady walk, just the flat-out extension of an animal who had been oriented and patient and present for long enough and was done being measured about it. He hit her at mid-chest level, both paws up for exactly 1 second before she got her balance, and then he dropped and pressed against her side and looked up at her with those amber eyes that had no complexity in them at all. "Yeah," she said. Her voice came out different than she'd planned. I know. She put her hand on his head. Torres arrived at a respectful distance. He was young. She'd clocked that the first night. But his professionalism was genuine, not performed. "He's been like this since he got back to the unit," he said. "Just oriented toward wherever you weren't." "I'll take the lead from here," she said. Torres nodded. Then, with the directness of someone who had been sitting with a question long enough to decide it was worth asking, "What do I call you, ma'am, or—" She thought about the hospital badge in her bag. "C. Merritt, RN." The photograph where she was mid-thought. She thought about the badge Ward had shown her in the corridor, with her rank and her real name, and how it had felt to see her own face staring back at her from something official that told the truth. "Claire," she said. "Just Claire." Torres nodded again, satisfied. She clipped the lead, not because Rook needed it, but because it was protocol, and protocol existed for reasons, and she had spent enough of her life working around the rules to know the difference between a rule that protected people and a rule that protected hierarchy. This one protected the dog and the trainer both. She stood on the training ground with the cold air and the pale winter sun and a Belgian Malinois pressed against her leg and the full weight of her own history in her chest where it had always been, and she looked at what was in front of her. Young medics. Future ones, that they'd be arriving next week, 12 of them in the first cohort, most of them 23 or 24 years old, most of them good at the technical components and uncertain about the judgment components, most of them going to end up in situations that no classroom fully prepares a person for. She knew what she was going to tell them. Not on the first day. First days were for protocol and logistics and the establishment of baseline expectations. But eventually, when the moment was right, when she could see in someone's face the specific uncertainty of a person being asked to make a call that their training covered but that their confidence hadn't caught up to yet, she was going to tell them this. You will be dismissed. You will be spoken over. You will make the correct call and watch someone with more institutional authority make the wrong one and live in the gap between those two things. You will build the record when no one is asking you to build it. You will stay in the room when leaving would be easier. Do it anyway. Not because the system will reward you, not because someone will see. Do it because the person in front of you is real, and your competence is real. And the distance between those two realities is the only space where medicine, or anything else worth doing, actually lives. The truth does not stop being true because someone with authority decides to call it something else. You do not stop being what you are because the record says otherwise. She would know. She had been proof of it for 9 years, and now she was something else. Something she was still finding the edges of, still learning the shape of. A woman with her name back and her record corrected and a dog by her side and a room full of future medics who needed to learn what she knew. She looked at the training ground, at the clear, cold morning. She tightened the lead, squared her shoulders, and walked forward into whatever came next. Not running from anything, not running toward anything that required her to be smaller than she was. Just walking, forward, with the truth beside her and the work ahead of her and the full weight of everything she'd carried, all of it, all 9 years, every correct call and every dismissed warning and every patient and every night shift and every moment of being, furniture in a room she should have been leading. Carried not as a burden now, but as the specific density of a person who had been through something real and had come out the other side still themselves. That was enough. That had always been enough. She had just needed the record to finally say so.